So good afternoon all and welcome to the day 2 of Advanced Strategic Management course. Today we are going to have the second unit of block 1 which deals with corporate policies. So students, like we discussed it yesterday, the basic aspects of corporate management, where we have understood that the concept of corporate management lies on three pillars. One is corporate planning, the second one is the implementation part and the action part of it, and third one is the critical review of the things, the evaluation part of the things itself. No, we have understood the importance of this corporate management, the kind of transformation that we had from the orthodox managerial practices to have a holistic approach in the management and to take all or each and every aspect of the corporates into actions, right? So the reasons are obvious. For the past 2 decades, our organizations have witnessed a drastic transformation in each and every aspect, right? May it be in the internal resources, may it be in the external environmental factors, whatever it may be. But significant amount of change has been witnessed by the corporates. So that has led the organizations to deal with the question of survival. That has led the organizations to have their competitive advantage. That has led the organizations to win over those competitions and survive. Situations were very critical for the organizations. Organizations, they have passed through a very tough time of scarcity of resources. Resource was not abundantly available. Resources are not as it was there in the previous days. So dealing with that requires a proper managerial aspect. So without resources, we all understand that without resources may it be very difficult for us to accomplish the objectives of the organizations. We have understood that there was a significant amount of change in the technology, particularly if I do talk of this information technology, or may I talk of this ICTs, information and communication technologies. So whatever it may be, this change of technology had a drastic impact on the organizations. And unless and until the organizations do adapt to those kind of changes, particularly in the field of IT or IT enabled services particularly, right? So it will be very difficult for the organizations to cope. The organizations may not survive. So definitely the organizations have to take a different approach altogether. That is the essence where we need to incorporate this corporate management. We have also have witnessed a significant change in the human values. Now, of course, if I do look into Indian scenario, may it be influenced by the culture of the Eastern economies and the culture of the Western economies. So Indian kind of economies reflect the human values, which is a mixed culture. But still, we need to deal with all those kind of changes that we do face or we do witness because of these human resources itself. May it be the societal values associated with human beings, may it be the cultural values associated with the human beings, may it be the aesthetic practices, may it be the spiritual practices, whatever it may be, we need to incorporate all those kind of changes that the human resources do face or human resources have witnessed in the past. That is where you need to incorporate those kind of things. We are talking of a change in technology, maybe in the production technology itself, right? Starting from a very manual way of production to the application of computers through computer-aided designing, computer-aided manufacturing processes, automation processes we had talked of. May it be the nanotechnology is made with the robotics, whatever it may be. So here we need to incorporate those kind of technologies being there in the organizations, and this could only be possible when we do take a holistic approach, and that is where we need this uh, corporate management itself. We also have witnessed a drastic change because of this globalization, liberalization, and privatization policies itself. So, there was a time when we used to say that any such products or services that you have to come out with, that is going to last long. But with the kind of changes, with the kind of change in taste and preferences of the customers, and because of the plenty of availability of choices, right? Unless and until I keep a continuous reformation in the existing set of product line or service line, it will be very difficult for me to survive. Products won't last for more than 6 months, a particular product design, unless and until it is added with some additional features or some modifications were there. It cannot sustain for more than 6 months or 1 year time. So that is why we need to upgrade ourselves on a continuous basis. And that is what we all know the cases, like it happened with Nokia, globally revolutionized product in the telecom sector itself. But where does it stand? It's only because of the inability to adapt to the changes, inability to upgrade themselves on a continuous basis. So here you have to come out with certain aspects where, like, you're thinking of organizational learning versus learning organizations. Organizational learning says we learn from our past experiences. We use that past experiences to take a future course of action plan. So this is a reactive process. What the organizations need at the present time is a proactive approach where we say it should be a learning organization. Learning should be there on a continuous process. Every time organizations need to upgrade themselves with the newer technologies, with the newer concepts, all of those things. That is where we do come out with the essence of this impact that this globalization has on the organizations. Globalizations also lead to have a stiff competition among the organizations. As we say, most of the organizations, they are tuned to the Darwin's theory. So they're dancing with that. Compete, we know about the competition, survive, or you don't have a place in the market. It's as simple as that. Because you are not only competing with the local players, you are competing with global chains. So anything can happen. In the past, we have witnessed like small players overtaking large organizations. So anything. We don't have a train. We don't have our past experiences being valid. We have to adapt to those kind of situations. So unless and until we do have that holistic approach, it will be very difficult for us to survive, and corporate management plays a role over there itself. We also understand that all these things requires a professional approach where those kind of orthodox or managerial practices are not going to help the organizations to overcome these kind of challenges which are being imposed on the organizations because of all of those things that we have understood. Beyond that, if we do talk of, these are the problems, of course, we have understood, right? But beyond that, if we do talk of the growth and development of the organizations, most of the organizations in the process of their growth and development, they are going for diversification, expansion, entering into new market niches, or going for internationalization process, transnationalization process, globalization process, whatever it may be. So if I do think of the growth and development of the organization, so here also I need to have that holistic approach. That is the reason why we have understood that this corporate management is essential at the present time. We don't take this corporate management as a option anymore. This has been a mandate for the organizations. Okay? So understanding that, let us move to the basic concept of this corporate policy itself. Now, if I to talk of these competitive advantages or the organizations, the way these organizations should achieve these competitive advantages is, it's in a simpler term, if I to say that organizations must accomplish their objectives. Okay? So in a process, we say organizations, starting with that, each and every organization do have a vision statement, right? And the vision statement reveals the visionary state of existence of an organization, where the organization would ultimately like to exist. That is what we see. Okay? So vision statements are normally very broad statements, generic statements with a deeper insight into it. And all of these vision statements are further broken down to the mission statement. Mission statements are the way through which we can reach to that visionary state of existence. So often we use the term mission because that gives us direction. From the mission statement, we confine our roadmaps to the objectives or goals of the organizations. So once we do have a clarity in terms of the goals of the organization, once we do have a clarity of what we are going to accomplish, right? So the next step is a strategic management or a strategic planning or a corporate planning, whatever we have discussed it in our previous class, right? So the corporate planning or the strategies, whatever we do take, that must lead to the action plans. Only planning is not enough. You need to understand that. Planning is not enough. Planning must be implemented. Planning must be transformed to the action plans itself. But question comes, whenever we do think of this planning to be transferred to these action plans, how it is going to happen? What will lead these existing strategies to be implemented? What is going to provide that framework? What is going to provide that direction whereby all of these strategies are to be converted to these action plans? What are the basic guidelines through which all of these strategies can be converted to the action plans? And the answer to all of these are the policy statement of the organization. Policies of the organization. That is what here you can see the definition, what it says, that management's expressed or implied intent to govern actions. So sometimes we will see the classification of these policies, corporate policies. Now sometimes these corporate policies are expressed, are written down, right? And we call that as a policy document. It may be a generic one, means a general one, having a wider notion of its application, or it may be a specific one. That is what we need to understand. It may be a broad one, but it can also be highly specific. Broad one is a policy statement which is driven from the missions of the organization, right? Ultimate thing that we are going to accomplish. So leading to a course of action plan. But we need to have specific policy documents also that is more confined to the operational system, day-to-day operations of the organization, right? So May it be a generic one, may it be a specific one, dealing with the day-to-day problems of the organizations, maybe dealing with the day-to-day aspects of the organization itself. But policy documents has two aspects, as it is said. Either it is expressed or it is implied. So maybe there can be certain things which we need to understand that it is a mandate for us to do certain things. Implied, like not expressed, but it is accepted by the members. And most of the time, the impact of this culture in the formulation of this corporate policy, intended, implied cultural things are to be taken into consideration. So each and every member of the organization must be aware of these expressed or implied policies of the organization. This will only lead them to a right direction itself. Now, if I talk of a different aspect of this corporate management itself, right? We understand the entire managerial processes into three different segments, right? Like it is a process by which you are procuring resources, right? It's a process by which you are acquiring resources, right? And it is a process through which you are converting these resources or utilizing these resources to accomplish the goals of the organization. But at the same time, so there was a debate like whether we should think of these available resources as a resource or as the assets of the organization. Something is treated as a resource, something is treated as an asset, but what is a resource, what is an asset, that's a different story altogether, right? But whatever it may be, whatever resources I do have in my organization, all those resources must be augmented, must be developed, so that on a long run, organization will be able to accomplish its goals. That is what we need to understand. So acquiring resource is one of the biggest challenges that we do have, right? Like maybe giving an example of human resources, right? So some or other organizations do believe or are being guided by certain philosophies. What it says that it's better not to have people in the organization than to have a wrong person in the organization, than to have a wrong person on board, because it can disrupt the entire culture of the organization. That is what we need to understand, right? So acquisition is really a challenge for the organization. Whatever resources you do have, having qualitative resource which will lead the organization to accomplish its goals is the biggest challenge for the organization. Even if you have these qualitative resources with you, but how to make the best possible utilization of that resource? I do have choices with me. May I go for this, maximum utilization of resources, minimum utilization of resources, optimum utilization of resources, whatever it may, right? But utilizing the resources to the best possible way in the organization is the second challenge that you do have. Whatever resource I do have, I need to utilize them to a proper way so that they can contribute their best towards the organization. So some or rather, to think of, getting all those resources engaged in the process of accomplishment of goals. That is what we need to think of. We are thinking of developing these resources, augmenting these resources. So unless and until on a continuous basis these resources are upgraded, are being considered, it may not be like the best way to think of the utilizing these resources in a proper way. That's what we are talking of, right? So the entire process of this corporate policy starts with a thought process, a thinking process, which will ultimately lead to the decision making process, which will ultimately lead to the action orientation. That is what is being explained over here. So I am deciding certain things by virtue of my thought processes for the action plans. So the pursuit of thinking, decision making, and action plans are the core aspects of this corporate policy. It is mentioned over there, like the pursuit of companies' objectives. That is where we do say, like this, we do have strategic planning with us. Then strategic planning lead to action plans. What enables over here is this policy, which helps this individual to think and take a decision. Think and take a decision. That is where we need to incorporate this. Right? However, whenever we do talk of these corporate policies itself, right, we do have three distinct views, as you can say, right? Sometimes some of the views says that these policies and strategies are synonymous to one another, right? Now, actually, when it comes to the basic modus operandi, where these objectives are converted to action plans, okay, we may have a consensus on that strategies and policies may be synonymous, right? But actually, whenever we do talk of the deeper aspect of the things, right, and we do say these strategies are more driven from the mission statement of the organization, from the objectives of the organization, or maybe the goals of the organization. So we do come out with a strategic action plan, which is more confined to planning process only. But if I do talk of this, the policies itself, policies are thinking and taking a decision. So it leads to a thought process and a decision making process. If I do think of both strategies and policies, okay, both of them, they may lead to a proper allocation of resources, right? But policy documents will help these resources to, move in the direction of the goal and acting upon the goal itself. That is what that we need to understand. We are thinking of, sometimes it is said that, policies are the implementing strategies. Okay. Having a consensus on that, because we do have all those, procedures, practices, structural designs of the organization, right? But if I do think of the basic hierarchy of the organization, structures we're talking of, right? Now, each and every structure has got its own impact on the organizations. We in the past we witnessed some, line organizations, staff organizations, bureaucratic organizations like that only. But with the changing times, with the demand of the external environmental factor, we come out with many such flexible organizational structures. And these organizational structures will define the entire operations of the organization. Its reporting relationships, the way this authority is being delegated, the way this loyalty is being delegated, how this communication is being made, all of those things, right? If we to talk of those traditional concepts, right? The scalar chain principles, chain of command, all those things. Like we are not using those kind of things. NDFL's 14 principles, if you remember, right? We are not using those kind of terminologies anymore, but that cannot be ignored. So if I do think of the structure, I must understand the basic structural implications, the procedures, the practices, all of those things are because of the policies. So policy document prescribes who is going to do what, right? So each and everything has to be documented. That's what is it. And whenever I do talk of these policies, we say Policies are long-range planning processes. Here you can say it's a decision regarding the future of an organization. So whatever I am doing right now, I do have an intention of evaluating the impact of that in some future day. So it is more confined to operational things than to the general practices of the organization. That's what you need to understand. So whatever I am doing, what will be the impact of that in the future days to come? Right. So I need to think of that. I need to evaluate that, the probable outcomes, whatever it may be. So based on that, I need to take a call. What can be done? What cannot be done? The way I can utilize the resources, or the way I should take up the challenge of this external environmental factors. All of those things are to be dealt with. So this policy statements of the organization, the policy documents of the organization, they are more confined to the way the action plans are guided. Let us help each and every individual employee to be guided with that particular thing. That is what we need to understand, right? So, just common features that we are talking of this policy documents do have, like we say, it's a general statement of principles. We understand each and every individual employee must be aware of the guide to their action plans. What we say, code of conduct, right? And it is not prescribed for a particular label of the organization, or it is not prescribed for a particular hierarchy of the organization. It is equivalently described for each and every hierarchical level of the organization. So made with the top level executives of the organizations like CEOs or board of directors, they need to understand their code of conduct. Made with the mid-level managers or the bottom level managers, right? Normally the mid-level managers are the back-end supporters for the accomplishment of organization's goals. And whenever I do talk of the frontliners, I do talk of the downline or the bottom line executives, the supervisory staff, workers, everyone in the organization must understand what is being expected out of them. So the basic code of conduct, that's what we do. These corporate policies do not have a short-term objective. Always remember that. These corporate policies are always a long-term thing, right? So once a policy document is formulated, so that becomes a basic guideline for all those employees. So that will be there. Of course, amendments will be required with the kind of changing environmental factors, but that amendment should not be a frequent one, right? So unless and until it is highly required, the policy document should be kept intact. That's what we need to understand. So that leads to accomplishment of these objectives itself. We are talking of the basic action framework by which these organizations can really accomplish their objectives. That's what we need to understand itself. We are talking of these policy documents are more generic statements, right? Normally is expressed in terms of qualitative or the conditional or the general statements itself, right? So it's more generic, which will give us a broad guideline towards the organization's operations, the way these action plans could be there, right? However, on specific cases, right, if it is required, then these policy documents can also be made specific ones. That's what we need to understand, right? So what it happens, why do we think of this policy document? Because this will save our time, this will save our efforts, right? Because once a policy document is framed, that will provide us a guideline, right? And that minimizes the brainstorming processes every time such incident to happen. So we do have a particular thing, a particular course of action plans for a particular incident is defined, well defined. So whenever you do come out with repetitive operations, right? So there you don't need to be worried for a brainstorming for each and every event. So whatever the policy document says, you just need to follow that particular thing, right? So whenever you do talk of this routine schedules of the organization, routine schedules, day-to-day affairs. So this policy documents help a lot in that, right? Similarly, whenever we are talking of this policy formulation itself, so this role of hierarchy is important, as I said, no. So moreover, top level managerial people, they are involved in the policy formulation phase itself. The policy which is more generic in nature. However, if I do talk of this bottom level managers, and if I do say that these bottom level managers are not a part of the policy formulation phase, then I may be wrong in that. So as I said, policies could be like, generic policies, general policies, policies could be specific. So this mid-level managers or the bottom level managers of the organization, executives of the organization, right? They are responsible for incorporating specific policy documents. So at one point of time, if we rely on the top level managerial people for their expertise and experience in making a generic or a general policy document, the mid-level people and the bottom level people who are directly associated with the first level of stakeholders, right? So they are the people who can really give you feedback to come out with specific aspects of the policy documents. That's what we need to understand. So role of all these levels of executives are there in the formulation of this policy document of the organization. Sorry, we'll come out with that. We're talking of this policy documents which helps us in taking a decision, right? So we may think of like having alternatives. We do have multiple choices with us, and each and everything is well defined, well prescribed in the policy document itself. So I don't need to be worried for the complexities of the decision making process. That's what we need to understand, right? So this policy document will help us in taking a decision. And other aspects like mutual application is there, both this, the executives of the organization, the non-executives of the organization, workers, all of them, they should be aware of that and they should take it together itself. Unified structure, there shouldn't be multiple policy documents for that. We're talking of a positive declaration. Let's check these policies as one of the document which will guide us for the future things, right? Now, if I were to talk of this basic features of this corporate policy itself, right? Or maybe I'm talking of this determinants itself, right? We say all these policy documents can be formulated by considering the internal determinants and the external determinants itself. Internal determinants, like we say, what is the mission of the organization? What is the core reason for which these organizations do exist? What is the purpose of existence of the organization? That has to be taken into consideration as the first and foremost thing wherever we do talk of this formulation of policy documents itself, right? So we need to think of the organization's core mission, and from that the derived objectives that will be the base of the that will be the first thing that to be considered for formulation of any kind of policy document, right? But at the same time, we do talk of the resources of the organization itself. Whenever I do talk of all those available resources, like what is the plant size of mine, right? What is the capital structure of the organization? What are the personal skills that the organization does have? What sort of product or service line the organizations do have? All of those things are to be taken into consideration. Depending on that only, you'll be able to formulate a policy. Right? Other than that, without considering all of those things, it will be very difficult for us to calculate these kind of requirements of the organization itself. I may go for a hypothetical condition and derive a particular policy, but when it will be implemented, the conditions will be something else. So it's better to have those kind of policies in a systematic way by considering all those resources available for the organization itself, right? And beyond that, we also need to consider the management values. What sort of managerial practices are being promoted in the organization? Maybe when we do talk of the basic growth and development of these managerial practices, let us say there are organizations where you do have still they do have this autocratic kind of management practices. Organizations are there where this bureaucracy is being taken into consideration. Organizations are there where this democracy is being taken into consideration. There may be a benevolent approach of the organizations, managers we are talking of, right? So how do I take my employees? How do I consider my employees for the accomplishment of organization's goals? That's what. Do I need my employees to simply follow the orders given to them? Or I also think of getting some inputs from my employees, participative style of management. What is required? And nowadays we do talk of team management. Let's work together. So what sort of managerial values people do have in the organization? That is what that will determine the entire thing. So considering this internal determinants is one of the aspects, but at the same time, we are talking of the external determinants, because these external determinants will, will decide the kind of policy documents that we are going to have itself. Say, we are talking about the first thing. What is the industry structure? Industry structure means we are talking of what is the size of the industry. What sort of industry is it? Like, is it a capital intensive industry or it is a labor intensive industry? There are differentiations. All these capital intensive industries are completely different from that of labor intensive industry in terms of its characteristics. So I need to understand these changes. I need to go for these kind of things before I do make a policy documentation. Right? We're talking of the competitive structure of the industry itself. I'm going to decide the number of players, the number of big players, small players, whatever it may be, are there, right? So what is the level of competition that I'm going to face in a particular industry? Based on that only, we need to think of the policy document, right? We are talking of, sometimes it becomes very difficult for us to enter into a particular industry or a segment of the industry itself, right? So is there an entry barrier? If I do, I need to think of that or dealing with that in a different way altogether. That's what. So considering the structure, industrial structure, we need to formulate our own policy itself. Right? We're thinking of the economic environment of the organizations, right? Like we are talking of the basic aspects of demand and supply being applicable on the organizations for each and everything that is there, right? But beyond that, we need to think of the kind of price hikes that we do have, or maybe the changes that we witness in the GDP or GNP right? So overall, all of these things are going to have an impact. So I need to consider this. We're talking of this, know, political environment itself. Now, most of the time, whenever we do talk of this political environment, it's okay. Beyond this country's political scenario, most of the time we do come out with certain things like monetary policies, fiscal policies, or maybe the credit policies, which may vary from government to government, from the approaches of the government itself. We need to take that into account. So different government structure, they do have different ideologies. They do come out with different sort of broad or general policies. What we need to do is that to have an abstract of that being implied in our organization. So we need to take all those kind of changes. Right? We do think of social engagements. Social engagements include like all of those things, like your religious practices you to talk of, your cultural practices you to talk of, your aesthetic practices you to talk of. Right? So considering all of those, and mostly it is related to the value systems of the people, which are driven from this religious or aesthetic or cultural values, are to be taken into consideration. That's what we have to understand that. We are thinking of the impact that these technologies do have. Of course, we had a detailed discussion on that, how we are going to have this kind of technological impact, right? So maybe we are talking of the impact that this information technology or information communication technologies do have. So considering all of those things, we do come out with the basic question, like how these policy documents are going to be implemented itself, right? So here we need to think of so we are talking of different category of people associated with the organization who have different sort of objectives, goals of their own. So whenever I'm going to I'm going to create a particular policy documentation, so I know that it is going to affect the various interest groups. Moreover, like as traditionally we used to say that managerial people and the workers of the organization, always they do have a conflict between themselves, considering the core objectives, profit maximization versus profit sharing. So this will always be there. Right? So considering the kind of changes that I'm thinking of in bringing the organizations, right? So I must take the consent of all the people who are going to be affected by that. Maybe they are the internal stakeholders, or maybe they are the external stakeholders. But all the groups of the people, whoever are being considered to be affected by the kind of change that I'm bringing into the policy document, or maybe a newly created policy document, the consent of all those groups of people must be taken into. Second thing, we're thinking of the various functional areas. Maybe you're thinking of this productions, human resources, marketing, finance, all those different verticals of the organization itself. Now, question is, the working culture of all these different verticals are different. Production department has got a different work culture. HR department has got a different work culture. Maybe finance or accounting sections do have certain other work culture. So what is required is to have specific policies for each and every vertical of the organization. By consolidating that, you need to come out with a general policy statement. So I have to take all these things into consideration. I cannot have a single policy document. Right? Based on that itself, we say that whenever we to talk of this policy, it is merely divided into or classified into two categories: major policies, minor policies. Right? So as we have already discussed on that, the top level managerial people of the organization, they are responsible for formulating the major policies of the organization, which is characterized as general, generic, or you know having a descriptive aspect of the things. But at the same time, we need to have maybe minor policies, which can be derived policies or add-on policies, something like that. What it says that the bottom level executives, like the middle level managers, the bottom level managers, they need to formulate certain policies based on the requirements of the organization, based on the operational aspects of the organization. That's what we need to say. So policies can be major, policies can be minor, policies can be general, policies can be derived, something like that, right? That is what we need to understand. So here we are going for the basic process of formulating these policies itself. Now, the first thing is, whenever we are talking of this policy formulation process, it always begins with a thorough analysis of the organizations. Organizational analysis. Maybe we are talking of the external environmental factors and the internal environmental factors, whatever we have studied it. Right? Now, why it is required to have a proper analysis of the environment? It's something like sometimes you do have certain symptoms, right, which is reflected, maybe different from that of the actual cause. So whenever there is a requirement of formulating a particular policy document, it's as simple as that. I cannot simply beat around the bush. So I have to be highly specific. So if I do not go by the deeper insights of, if I do not go by the deeper insights of the cause, right? We say analyzing the root cause of the problem. Right? We sometimes we do have different sort of strategies to find out the different aspects of the environment making an impact on the organizations, right? So understanding that will only help me out to systematically implement all those things that we are talking of. So the first thing is that I need to have a thorough analysis of my internal environmental factors, a thorough study of my stakeholders or my resources, and the external environmental factors. Sometimes we classify that as tested, political, economical, social, technological, maybe environmental, legal, whatever you do talk of, right? All of those factors are to be properly analyzed before going for a policy formulation. First. Next is we do talk of this second phase, which is the identification of policy alternatives. Sometimes before coming out with the final version of the policy document itself, I need to consider the impact that this draft policy document will have in future. Right? We say that the present day is characterized as a VUCA world. No? We say volatility, uncertainties, complexities, ambiguities, all those things, right? So if I have to talk of this VUCA world, I cannot rely on a single policy document. I cannot rely simply. Because I don't know the policy document, whatever I do have, will yield me the end result that I desire or not. Whether that will be able to reach to that final destination or not, I'm not sure of that. So it's purely a kind of hit and run kind of thing. So we need to have alternatives. We need to have alternatives. Beyond that, if I do say, if I do think of the organizations, like we are saying that before going for this formulation of policies in the organizations itself, right? So organizations must go for a SWOT analysis. They must understand what is their own strength areas. They must understand what are the threats they do have. What are the challenges they are going to face in future? What sort of resources they are going to develop? All of those things. So based on the kind of SWOT analysis, organizations must decide some policy alternatives. So if A is not working, then what? B is not working, then what? C, like that. We do talk of that. And after that, we are talking of a process, what we call it as a policy audit, where we are thinking of evaluating the policy alternatives. Each and every policy alternative that we have generated in the second step, right? So that has to be evaluated in terms of its impact that is going to have in some future days. So when I implement that particular policy, what will be the end result of that? When I implement that particular thing, what will be the end result of that? That is what you need to think of evaluating the policy alternatives. Maybe you can make an application with a sample size, but you need to before consolidating these policy documents, right? You need to think of implementing those in the organization itself. Okay, test and try, and then take the final output, evaluate all of those, and then at the end you to come out with the final choice of the policies. So out of the evaluation, whatever alternatives you have got, you have received, right? So based on that only, you're going to choose the final version of the policy. So draft policy to the final policy. The journey will pass through these particular phases. Okay? And towards the end, let's understand some of the different types of this corporate policies itself. When it comes to the classification of these corporate policies, based on the scope of its applications, right? So we do talk of certain basic policies. Basic policies are developed by top level managerial people. These are all generic things. These are all with general statements and all those things that happens to be there, right? Beyond that, we do talk of this mid-level managerial people who are having the responsibility of formulating these general policies, right? This is some specific in approach itself. But whenever I do talk of this foreman of the organizations, right, the ground staff, the people who are really involved in the particular process, right? So they are the people who are responsible for calculating this specific policy itself. Policies, as we have discussed, can be expressed, can be implied, can be expressed through documentation process. Policies can be implied also. So there are people need to understand what is being expected out of them. On the basis of labels, we say that certain policies are defined by the top level managerial people. Certain policies are defined by mid-level managerial people or lower level managerial people, right? So we can have a classification on the basis of that also. But on the basis of the origin itself, we say there are certain original policies, right? The first such policy documentation, which is a draft one, right? Or maybe the first such thing which is converted to into a policy documentation. So that is the original piece one, right? But there may be certain suggestions in that, modifications in that. We say that is appealed policies, right? But sometimes you do say because of certain mandates that the government does have, you need to come out with certain policy documents. It's a compulsory process, right? So any kind of changes in the rules and regulations of the government, we do think of implementing that, right? So it is imposed policy. You don't have a choice other than to impose that, right? And derived policies are there where we do say that these are sometimes these policies are derived from that original policies, right? So we call that as this original things, right? Beyond that, sometimes we do have these policies which are classified on the basis of the functional areas itself. Like we do talk of this production policies. Production policies deals with location, plant layout, what would be the kind of inventory system that the plant would like to have, what would be the kind of equipments that the plant will have, on the basis of the technologies, what sort of technologies the plant is going to have. All of those things will be there as a part of the production policies itself. Whenever we talk of this marketing and sales policies, of course, we need to understand like what was the basic criteria, like online, offline strategies related to market expansion, diversification, all of those things, right? We say policies which are more, confining itself to the financial aspects of the thing, right? And we do talk of the basic personnel policies, like we are talking of like from requirement or recruitment to the retirement. Each and every organization must go through that itself, right? And we are talking of this classification of policies on the basis of the management itself. So there are certain planning policies. Planning policies are the documents which gives you a roadmap to the accomplishment of organization's goals. There can be policies. Organizing policies are more confining to the allocation of resources and utilization of resources. We are talking of actuating policies itself. So actuating policies ensures that whatever resource is being deployed for a particular thing, those resources are properly utilized, right? And we need to have some control mechanism, right? So these are different types of policies that you need to understand itself, right? And let us conclude today's session. Why these policy documents are actually important for the organizations, right? So having considered with all of those kind of things that we have already discussed, so a systematic effort is required to convert those strategies into action plans. And sometimes we need to attain these objectives. We don't need to waste our time, energy, money in that. We need to have a particular framework of decision making which will yield us the same kind of output every time we come out with that. So repetitive work in that. There has to be a proper delegation of the things, right? So these are the basic things that is required for the organizations to implement corporate policies. So students, let's end our session over here, right, with this kind of discussions. And once again, we will meet with the second module, the third unit in our future testing. So thank you very much and have a good day.